actually solve the law of cosines. Now, if you remember from the last video, there are two different instances where we do the law of cosines. This first one is what we call SAS, because I have a side, the angle between them, and the other side. So two sides and the angle in the middle. That's SAS. The other option that we'll talk about in just a little bit is SSS, because I have all three sides. Now, here's the most important thing to know with the law of cosines, is the order in which you solve things is extremely important. So, if we have side angle side, you have to solve for things in a very specific order. First off, you need to solve for the side across from the angle first. So here's my angle. I'm going to solve for this side very first, and that's how you always do it with SAS. After we solve for this side, the second thing is to solve for the smallest angle next. And we'll talk about that, what that means in just a second. So let's start by solving for the side across from the angle. Well, to do that, let's label it. So this is going to be little a, that's going to be little b, and that's going to be little c, because we go across to find them. So I need to solve for little a first. If that's what I'm solving for, then that is what my equation should start with. And now we use our pattern. If I start with a squared, then next is going to come b squared and c squared. Then my minus 2, repeat those two letters, and then cosine of capital of the letter I started with. Let's fill in what we know. B is 12, C is 16, minus 2, repeat those ones, and then capital A is 38 degrees. Now, we could just type all this into our calculator and come up with an answer, but usually students make little mistakes like forgetting a parentheses when they type that in. So I would highly suggest that you solve this in pieces so that you don't make those little mistakes on your test. And this is the way I would do this. I would type just that part into your calculator first. 12 squared plus 16 squared. If you type that part in, you should get 400. Next, I would just type in this part. Negative 2 times 12 times 16. And you should get negative 384. And then I still have that cosine of 38 tagged onto it. Now, if I look at this, I haven't actually solved for a yet because a isn't by itself. So to solve for a, I need to get rid of that square. To get rid of a square, I need to square root it. But then I have to do it to both sides. So now a is finally by itself. And this is what you would type into your calculator. Square root of 400 minus 384 cosine of 38. If you type that into your calculator, you should get 9.869. And remember, we round to 3 decimals this chapter. So I now know that little a is 9.869. Awesome. Step 1, solve for the side across from the angle. Check. Now, let's talk about step 2. Because if you look at this triangle, don't I now have a complete pair? I have big A and I have little a. And if I have a complete pair, that means I can use the law of sines. So instead of doing this big gross law of cosines again, let's just do what we learned last time, the law of sines. But here's the key. If you're going to use the law of sines next, which is easier, we must solve for the smallest angle next. If you don't do that with the law of sines, sometimes your calculator will give you the wrong answer because law of sines has something called the ambiguous case and it gets confusing, but we only talk about that in honors, so we're not going to worry about that. Just know, solve for the smallest angle next. So the next question is, I have capital C and capital B. Which of those is the smallest angle? Because they look pretty darn close. Well, to find the smallest angle, find the smallest side. So if I look at little b is 12, little c is 16. So if I want to solve for the smallest angle, then I start with the smallest side, which is little b, so 12, which means I need to solve for big B next. That's going to be the smallest angle. So let's set up our law of sines. Remember, this should be what we know. I know my pair of A's. This should be what I want to know, which in this case, I'm going to solve for big B next because that's my smallest angle. So my B's. Let's start by plugging in what we know. I know capital A is 38 degrees. I know little a is 9.869. I do not know capital B, and little b is 12. So, review of last lesson. We're going to start with cross multiplying. That means I have this top one, sine of 38, times, and then we go across, my 12, equals, now let's do the other one, 9.869 times, go across, sine of b. Now, if I need to solve for b, that means I need to get b by itself. So I need to start by getting rid of this 9.869 by dividing. So now I have sine of capital B equals sine of 38 degrees times 12 divided by 9.869. Now to get b by itself, I need to get rid of sine. To get rid of sine, like we learned last lesson, I do my inverse sine. But what I do to one side, I have to also do to the other side. So I got rid of my sine here. Those cancel out because they're opposites. So I get capital B is the inverse sine of all this. And this should be really familiar because this is what we did in 9.1. Next, I just need to type all that into my calculator. And if you type all that in, you should get 48.469. 3 decimals, because that's what we do this chapter. Don't forget your degree symbol, because this is a capital letter. Anytime we have capital letters, we should end in degrees. Now, my last step. I know that capital A is 38. I know that capital B is 48.469. So, I should be able to use my 180 rule to find capital C. I just need to do 180 minus the 2 that I have, and that'll be what I'm left with. So if I type that in, 180 minus the 2 that I have, I should get 93.48. And don't forget degrees because it's a capital letter. So that is our first example of the law of cosines, and this is the exact process you follow if we have side angle side. In the last video for this lesson, we'll talk about the process we follow if we have side, 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 because it's going to be quite a bit different from what we just